Could the US government really make you choose between your American citizenship and your freedom to live abroad? It sounds extreme, but a new proposal has people asking real questions. Today, Ted Baumann joins me to explain what's happening, what's realistic, and what you should do now if you are an American thinking about retiring abroad, getting residency outside the US, or securing a second passport.
So on December 2, Senator Bernie Moreno, a Republican of Ohio, introduced the Exclusive Citizenship Act of 2025, which would, codify that citizens of the United States must have, quote, must have sole and exclusive allegiance to the US. And under this bill, no one, in theory, nobody would be allowed to remain a US citizen if they had citizenship of another country. So to break down exactly what this means and what the impacts might be for the more than 40 million Americans by some counts who are already eligible or already hold dual citizenship, I have with me here International Living's global diversification expert, Ted Baumann. Ted, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
First, if this bill were to become law, what do you see as the sort of fundamental choice people would have to make?
Well, I think it's pretty straightforward. You'd have to choose whether you wanted to continue to have U.S. citizenship or whether you were willing to give up another citizenship if you have one. Basically, you have to choose. You're either going to be only an American or you're not. And, for people who already have dual citizenships, that means they have to choose to give it up. For people who might want one in the future, they'd lose that right, basically.
And now, to be clear, at this point, we only have what the senator has said. There's no publicly
Mm,
available
yeah.
text for this bill. So going on what we do know, which is sort of what he said, it sounds like, practically speaking, what does that mean? Like you and your family you're American, but you live in South Africa. Talk us through what the ramifications are for that, both I would say practically and maybe philosophically too.
Yeah, they concern me on both levels, Jen. Look, if it becomes law, any American who has voluntarily taken up foreign citizenship would have to give up their U.S. citizenship from the date that the law takes effect. In other words, the date that it's signed by the president. Now, Americans like me and like my wife and my daughter who already are dual citizens would have to file a written renunciation of our South African citizenship with the US government within 1 year of the law taking effect. And if the government doesn't get that letter, they will simply remove us from the list of citizens and treat us as a foreigner. So, if we tried to go back to the United States, a year after this bill was passed, our passports would have been canceled. We would not be allowed into the country without a visa and so on and so forth. And of course, anybody who wanted to acquire a second citizenship in the future would face the choice of having to give up their American citizenship in order to be able to do that. So it's pretty dire. I mean,
It's
the number
extreme.
it's
I
extreme.
mean,
The number look, the number of people who are becoming second citizens is increasing dramatically every year. So this goes directly against that, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But it is extreme. But as I can explain in a bit, there are precedents for this in American political history. So we can talk about that in a moment.
yeah, now I know there are some countries that do have rules like this. China, right? Singapore, Saudi Arabia are among them. For some time, Germany had this rule, but I know in the case of Germany, there were exceptions for familial ties. So, like, let's say a German
Mhm.
woman marries an American man and they have kids. That German woman didn't have to give up her German citizenship, and her kids could hold dual citizenship. So there were
Mhm.
sort of exceptions to that rule. But this, I mean, we don't know that much about it, but it sounds draconian to my mind. Um, so w- you have said you wrote an article for us about this, sort of analyzing what the
Mhm.
situation is, and you said that it is a sort of giant flashing sign of what's to come. And what do you
Yeah.
mean by that?
All right. Well, I mean, first of all, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned China amongst the countries that have a rule like this, because that says something about it. I mean, it's
Yeah.
actually a recurring theme since the beginning of America. This idea, the Declaration of Independence speaks of inalienable human rights, that pre-exist the authority of government, right? I mean, Thomas Jefferson said, we hold these truths to be self-evident. And the whole justification for the rebellion against the British Crown was that it wasn't respecting these inalienable rights, it was running over them. So when the founders wrote the Constitution, they were trying to construct an arrangement where the government would protect and support these inalienable rights, not override them or substitute them with their own arbitrary preferences. So in a way, you can think of the United States as adding together all of our individual sovereignties as American citizens and putting together one big country. And by that understanding, if a person like me decides to become a citizen of another country, the government has no right because I'm simply exercising a basic right of my own. But there has always been a sort of less sophisticated view that sees American nationality as having more power, more importance than the rights of American individuals. And if you think about countries like Germany under the Nazis, the argument was that the good of the folk overrides the right of the individual. And the same is true of communist countries like that today. So basically, Moreno's bill is an attempt to enforce a particular view of American nationality on everyone. Allowing Americans to exercise their rights to have more than one citizenship doesn't actually have any practical implications on the United States. It hasn't had any major implications or any up till now. So really, this is an exercise in pure, domination of one viewpoint over others, with no real reason for it. And so to answer your question, I think it is extreme, but it's something that's been around for a long time. And it's just up till now that we haven't had an administration and a Congress that was willing to overrun and overturn our inalienable rights in this way. So you asked about, what the practical implications. Look, every year, millions of Americans look to get residency abroad, build a Plan B, and a lot of them now, increasing numbers, rapidly increasing numbers, want a second passport. I mean, I should know, right? I mean, one of my jobs here at International Living is to help people, work through my consultation services to help people figure out if that's the right thing to do, and if so, how to do it. So basically, Moreno's bill would close that door completely. It would force you to take their way or leave. And, whether the bill passes or not, and there are good reasons to think it might not, the winds are changing. There are some people in government now who simply do not hold the same beliefs that we have assumed, really since the beginning of the Republic, that would protect us from this kind of thing.
And it just occurred to me too, the United States taxes people on their worldwide income, taxes their citizens on their worldwide income. So, if people are given a choice, a certain number of people, and again, there are millions of people who hold dual citizenship, might choose not to stay in the United States, right?
Yeah.
So if that happens, that does impact the US, because this idea of they wouldn't have any access to those people's to tax those people's income anymore.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that's not clear about this bill, you mentioned that we haven't seen the text, is what would happen to the expatriation process. Because right now there is a
Right.
way to stop being an American citizen. You file the forms and you go through all the hoops, and then they confirm that you are no longer a citizen. Of course, you have to become a citizen of another country first to be able to do
Before,
that.
right.
But what's not clear is if the expatriation taxes would apply under this bill. So let's say that you're involuntarily kicked out of your American citizenship. Would you have to pay an exit tax the way
Right.
people who have enough? We don't know, but that would be pretty extraordinary, I would think. So don't worry. The tax man will get his pound of flesh, I think, even if people, are involuntarily expatriated. I think my guess is that they will continue to enforce that.
And again, this may just be political theater, right? Like, you know what I mean? We don't know, but we don't know.
Well,
Yeah.
I think I
Yeah.
think I think Senator Moreno basically, like I said, he reflects an ongoing trend. It's been around for a long, long time. There are certain people who feel quite fanatically, really, that American nationality is separate and better and different than every other nationality, and therefore, it's such a privilege and an honor that you shouldn't sully it, but by
Mm.
adding others to it. And it's interesting to me that he was actually born a Colombian,
Yeah.
and he's a naturalized citizen. And you know what they say about Catholics? The converts are always the ones who are the most, you know, the most extreme about their beliefs. I have a feeling that that's probably the way he feels.
So
But like I
in
said, this has happened
no,
before. So yeah,
I was going to say, let's talk about that happened before. I mean, like in
yeah, yeah,
history, you're an economist and a historian
yeah,
by training. We've seen this in the U.S. before, a version of this. Do you want to just kind of walk us
yeah.
through that a little bit? Because that's sort of interesting.
Yeah, well, what's interesting is that the first time the Supreme Court ever considered this issue was in 1795. There was a court case that arose out of, sea ships and whatever, where the Supreme Court concluded that there was no constitutional reason why American citizens couldn't have a second citizenship. But nevertheless, after the Civil War, the government basically said, look, anybody who takes a second citizenship, we're just going to assume that they give up their American citizenship. It wasn't even clear in law. They just did it. They just took away your rights. Now, in 1907, Congress did pass a law that said that you would lose your status as a citizen if you naturalized somewhere else. And what still freaks me out to this day is the idea that married women lost their U.S. citizenship if they married a foreign man, even if they didn't intend to live in the other country. They just took it away from them. But it was in the 1960s when the government said there was a famous case in 1967, Ephraim versus the United States, where the Supreme Court ruled definitively. They said you can have more than one citizenship. It is part of your inalienable rights as a human being. Now, you'd think that the Supreme Court wouldn't go back and revisit this, but they've been doing that a lot lately.
Yeah.
They've been going back and saying, well, we thought that Supreme Court in those days was wrong, and so therefore we're going to overrule that and put in a new interpretation. So it can happen. It can happen. And,
Hmm.
you know, whether that happens or not, I think that the key thing is that it makes us realize that our freedoms to move, to live, to work, to retire abroad, they are not unlimited. They're not guaranteed. Just because they haven't been interfered with up to now doesn't mean it's not going to happen. I mean, our own government is basically saying, members of the government are saying, we think that we have the right to override your natural human freedoms and impose these things on you, and basically strip us of what I would call our inherent global citizenship and force us to keep the status that they prefer us to have. That is not good. That is not what a proper democracy does, unfortunately. And that means that those of us who are thinking about doing this in the future need to pay careful attention and act accordingly.
That was my next question. So, what does it
Yeah,
mean for the average person? What does it mean for the person who's thinking, like, oh, I would like to have
yeah.
residency someplace else or have a second passport, possibly? Like, what do I do in the face of the specter of this sort of change?
Well, I think if you think this is going to happen, you need to call me straight away because one of the things we do at International Living is I can help you analyze your situation, figure out what path will take you from where you are to where you want to be when it comes to diversifying yourself and your wealth internationally. And I think the doors are starting to tighten. They're starting to close. And so I would say do it now, because if push comes to shove, if they do adopt this law, let's say, for example, then a person who surreptitiously tried to obtain a second citizenship would be violating federal law, and God knows what penalties,
Hmm.
prison time, who knows what it could be. So if you really want to have the freedom to be able to say, look, I'm tired of living here and under these conditions, I want to live somewhere else and I want to be part of their country, you need to start doing it now because clearly the people in charge in Washington are thinking very differently. And, you know, one of the biggest concerns, I think, is that the United States it gives permission kind of subtly, implicitly to other countries to tighten their own rules. I mean, we saw this, during the first Trump administration, just, not knocking Trump, but it's just Zimbabwe, which is a dictatorship, was saying, you see, even Americans do these things, so that's why we do these things. And that's what worries me because we could have retaliation. I've
Hmm.
said for a long time that if the US took certain policy pathways, that other countries could start shutting doors to us because they say, look, you're not a part of the community of nations. You're not operating in the right way. So therefore, we're going to tighten our rules for Americans. So if you're worried about that, yeah, you need to move now. I mean, I do expect my phone to be ringing off the hook pretty soon.
Right. So I want to
Yeah.
ask one question just to close out here. And maybe this is something I should have asked at the top, but just you're our global diversification expert here at International Living. what's the argument, just generally speaking, like what is the argument for having a more international footprint, regardless of who's in power in
Yeah.
Washington, like why is it that you feel it's so important, and that we, to be frankly, we at International Living feel it's so important?
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, is the argument, right? I mean, we're living it. So the argument is that you really can never tell what's going to happen. You can't assume that things will always be the way they are. And if you don't diversify yourself and your wealth away from one jurisdiction and spread them around so that you have options, then effectively your freedoms are being limited, and you run the risk of having options foreclosed on you in the future. I mean, if I think of myself now, if I weren't a South African citizen and I were committed to becoming one, this law would break my heart, because I would feel like I would have to choose something that I don't want to have to choose and shouldn't have to choose. But I'd also give up all the benefits that I've had through, years of living in a foreign country as a citizen, which have been considerable. I mean, you can look at, I've done videos, I've written articles about how it has changed my life, and just the psychological sense of having the knowledge that if things get really bad in one place, you have another where you're welcome, and you'll always be welcome. And it's not going to be dependent on a bureaucrat assessing, whether they're going to renew this
Mhm.
permit or whether they're going to send you back to the United States. You have the right to stay there. If I didn't have that, I think I'd be a depressed person. And for people who are just casually thinking about diversification, it's like anything else. If you put all your eggs in one basket, if that basket
Mhm.
falls, all your eggs break. And countries are baskets. You really need to think about diversifying. And it's not just about residency, it's about wealth as well. I mean, what happens if the next government in Washington adopts really confiscatory taxes and raises taxes to extreme heights to pay off the national debt or something? People, if this law were to pass, you'd have no options. I mean, what would you do? You wouldn't be able to get your wealth out of the country. So I think let's do it now. Let's act on the need and the impulse if you feel it. That's my advice.
All right. Thank you, Ted. That's great. Well, let's wrap
No
up
problem.
there. Thanks for joining me. I appreciate it.
Pleasure.
And we'll stay on top of this story as it develops, and just sort of,
Yes.
we'll check back in when we know more about
Yep.
what this bill might and end up looking like. And
Yep.
if you are watching and you're interested in getting more information about this, Ted's consultation services or International Living, and as Ted said, being more international isn't just about second passports. It's about figuring out where to go, how to arrange your life so that you can take advantage of opportunities around the world. And that's really what our core mission is at International Living. And you'll find a link below. So thanks a lot, Ted. See you soon.
Pleasure. Take care, Jen.
If you want a clearer picture of your best options overseas, not just for mobility, but for cost of living, healthcare, visas, lifestyle, and more, you need our full 2026 Global Retirement Index. It's the most comprehensive guide we publish each year, and it breaks down the top 24 countries where your money goes further and your quality of life improves. You'll find a link below to our special report and more details.